Unique people leading unique lives shape and inform Iowa City. This community is enhanced by these women and men who live in our midst, working, teaching, creating. Welcome to a series of conversations with people who have stories to tell. Join my guests and me, Ellen Buchanan, in a series of interviews called One of a Kind. Jim Swaim, the retired United Action for Youth Executive Director, is my guest today on One of a Kind. For 40 years under Jim's leadership, United Action for Youth became a role model for the state and nation for its advocacy and innovative programs for helping the young of this community. Beginning as a small organization with a one-person staff, helping maybe about 300 youths annually, they're now at $1.5 million budget, reaching over 2,500 young people a year. United Action for Youth offers counseling, development, and prevention programs. Jim, over the years, helped the Iowa City Community School District develop its alternative school program, which evolved into the current Tate High School. He also helped develop a Big Brothers Big Sisters program that merged into the local Big Brothers Big Sisters. In 1983, UAY became a federally funded center for runaway and homeless youth. In '86, the agency received funding from the state for programming to assist crime victims. He served on the Iowa City Public Library Board, the National Board for Runaway Youth, and was asked to chair the National Symposium for Runaway Youth. In addition, UAY, under Jim's guidance, helped establish new programs for youth development, leadership, and teen parenting. Professional peers of Jim consider him a pioneer in youth development and a mentor to many in the field. He was given an award by the UAY board for being an outstanding advocate for young people. Jim and his wife, Ginna Lee, raised two children, Quenby and Logan, in Iowa City, and had a foster son for a few years. Your story, welcome to One of a Kind.
Thanks, Ellen.
Begins in 1951
Yes.
in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Tell me about your first family. I know your father was in the military, and this must have had influenced you.
It did. I grew up in a military family. I was born in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas in 1951. I have two older brothers who went to military academies. My mom was an Army nurse in World War II. So I grew up all over the world, but my father's final Army assignment was the senior Army advisor to the Iowa National Guard. So we moved here in 1963 and then stayed, and I went to high school in Des Moines and went to Iowa State and came here. But the Army was a big part of our life growing up.
Did your father maybe have expectations that you too would join the military?
He thought that would happen, or all of us growing up, thought about being in the military and certainly thinking about military academies. But we might get into it later. I ended up going in a different path.
Well, no, I read in the research that you became a conscientious objector.
I was.
And how long did that take till?
Well, when I was draft age, my lottery number was 28, and from the time I was in high school on, I knew some things were going to be challenging for me in terms of the military.
Like?
I couldn't kill things or people. And in writing the paper that I had to do to be a conscientious objector, you had to identify your earliest beliefs. My brothers both remember an incident that I had written about where we went out to learn how to shoot, and we were shooting paper plates, and I thought that was cool. And then the next day, the gentleman we were staying with had been my dad's boot camp sergeant back in 1940. And Uncle Bob said, okay, now we're going to go out and shoot rabbits. And I was like, well, no, I'm not shooting any rabbits. And when I started to equate shooting with killing things, then I had a harder time with it. And then over my childhood, when we lived in Germany, we lived in Berchtesgaden, which is where Adolf Hitler had been. And I had a profound experience at Christmas time there, seeing a wall where all of the village boys who had been killed on the Eastern Front had pictures, and most of them were 14, 15, 16-year-olds killed on the Western Front. And I had a long conversation with my chaplain in Berchtesgaden. I said, geez, I don't know where I'm at with war. And anyway, he was a member of the Brethren Church, which is traditionally a peace church. So he and I had lots of conversations. But when I got to college, I knew that I was going to be a conscientious objector. The thing I didn't expect was I had intended to go into the Army as a medic and be a non-combatant member of the military. But at the time, there were standing orders that required you to provide priority treatment to those soldiers who could be returned to combat. So if you had two people that you encountered in the field, you were under what's called a standing field order to help the one who can go back, even if the intervention for the one who's not going to go back is more life-saving and stuff. And I just said I couldn't do that. So that was a hard time for my father. But up until then, we were pretty mellow with each other.
How long when did you finally get your status, your CO status?
It took several months. I had to drop my student deferment at the time in 1971. If you couldn't have a student deferment, and then as your student deferment, faded out, say, oh, I think I'm opposed to war. So I gave up my student deferment, applied, got letters of support. At the time, both my brothers were serving in Vietnam. The minister who I had in Germany had become the chaplain of all the chaplains, or the head of all the chaplains in Germany. He wrote a letter. My father ultimately did write a letter in support of me. It was almost like a Monty Python type letter. I don't agree with my son, but he has had all these beliefs. And even then, the vote was 2-1 to give me a CO. So
bless your father's heart for doing that. It was,
and actually, I learned from my father something that I carried to UAY, which is the whole notion of unconditional positive regard. You accept people for who they are, even if you differ with them. So my father and mother both were great role models for me about the whole notion of treating people with unconditional love. So I tested that a lot with my dad.
I can imagine. At about the time you got your draft notice, you met your wife.
Yeah, I'd met my wife earlier. We were scheduled to get married on May 27th in 1972, and on May 26th, as we were going through the last minute, we're getting checks and fun things from Aunt Mary across the country. Then the night before, in the pile of mail was my notice saying that I needed to report on June 24th.
So what happened?
Well, I had visited my brother in Tacoma. By that time they had come back from Vietnam. One brother was actually stationed at Fort Lewis in Tacoma, and my other brother was stationed at McChord Air Force Base in Tacoma. So I went out to thank them and just connect with them. And my brother had a colleague and a classmate from West Point who was running the Fort Lewis drug rehab program. And he was a West Point graduate. And there were a number of conscientious objectors who were working for him, including some who were civilian conscientious objectors. So Pete had invited me to visit with a couple of them. I went through about a 3-week quick training program, and the notion was that I was going to go to Tacoma and work at the Fort Lewis drug rehab program. The week before I was supposed to start there, Pete got a standing order from all the drug programs that they now also were supposed to give priority drug abuse treatment to those who could go back to combat. And he said, I know that's the key element for you. What do you think? And I said, geez, I don't know that I can do that. He was a volunteer at a youth agency. He said, why don't I try and connect you with this great group of people, and we'll see if we can get you steered toward them, and maybe the Selective Service Board back in Iowa will let you do your service there. And that's
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Were you living in Des Moines at the time?
Well, by then I had gotten drafted and had gone out to Tacoma thinking I was going to start at Fort Lewis. And And
So when did you get married?
I got married on May 27th.
Oh, you did get, okay.
We got married.
And then what brought you from Tacoma to Iowa City? I mean, what was the draw?
Well, I had gone to school here for a year, even though I didn't get any credits because I gave up my student deferment. My wife wanted to come back here, and I was back on a one-week vacation visiting a friend. And back then, the summer school enrollment, you would be over at the field house, and they'd have giant, you kind of went in and bargained for your courses, and they'd have the long tables of all the student associations and other volunteer groups. And a friend of mine said, hey, I saw that there's a youth agency here. They had a sign up that they're looking for an outreach counselor. Isn't that what you do? And I said, yeah. So I stopped by and visited. They were looking for an outreach counselor. And the place I'd been working was going through some challenging times, and it wasn't sure that they were going to be able to sustain things for more than a few more months. And so I was able to transfer back and started at UAY in 1973.
Was it formed at that time, or did you form it?
No,
been
UAY was organized
going
in 1970. And so I got hired by a gentleman named Lloyd DeMoss. And so my first year was as an outreach counselor, and then Lloyd retired or resigned to be more involved in raising hunting dogs. He got out of social work. And Jeff Shabillion, who was on the board, who was one of the co-founders of UAY, they met and decided to offer me the job as director. Jeff had at my retirement party, he was sharing a story that several people at the time said, do you really think this young long-haired guy can do the job? And several board members who had seen my work as an outreach counselor doing work with kids said, yeah, I think he's got good enough judgment.
And 40 years later, I'd say you were the right man for the job.
I guess so.
So you start out, you were it, and you had not a lot of young kids. Look how it's grown. What have you things changes, and what have you added, and what have been the best success stories, and what have been the most challenging?
A couple of things happened. One is I used to be embarrassed about being the director. I liked youth work, and that's what drew me to being the director, and I liked youth work. I liked working with teenagers a lot. But for the first several years, I used to, if I was at a meeting and asked to introduce myself, I'd say, I'm a youth worker. I would never say, I'm a director of a youth agency. And finally, I was at a workshop, and a good friend of mine said, you act as if you're embarrassed about that. And I said, well, that does kind of feel creepy. And he said, aren't you proud that you're director? And why don't you think of your staff as your clients? And so you're a small businessman, and the small business you're in is trying to have people who can do really good youth work. And that changed me a lot. Then I thought, I need to be an enthused director. But anyway, somewhere in that period, I had been doing lots of program development after the first several years that I was there. And we were able to get a grant, a law enforcement assistance grant, which at the time used to buy police equipment. But they had a requirement that 20% of what they got for the state of Iowa had to be spent on juvenile justice related equipment. And
what is that?
Well,
juvenile justice
that
equipment?
That means stuff for kids, for juvenile cops, they had literally run out of things to buy because every juvenile officer, they'd already bought squad cars for them, so that could no longer count. And a colleague of mine who was the director of Eastern Iowa law enforcement said, there's these funds available. And there was a program that had started in Ames that had an electronic arts workshop. And so I wrote a grant to buy electronic rock and roll equipment. And we actually wrote 3 grants, one to buy the stuff, one to operate the program for 2 years, and a third grant that would actually evaluate the program. A woman who later joined our board, Polly Nichols-Arp, was at the University Hospital and helped evaluate the program the first 2 years. And it showed that young people involved in the arts are less likely to feel bad about themselves. They're more likely to feel connected to things. And all of those things help reduce delinquency. So
Is it still going on?
it is. That's
Great.
the cornerstone of what the youth center is. We at the UAY Youth Center, there's a professional recording studio, there's an art gallery, an art studio, and we also have an extensive youth volunteer program, a youth leadership program. You know, really in the young people that come through UAY, if we serve 2,400 youth in a year, about 600 to 800 of them are involved in counseling, which means the vast majority of the young people at the agency are just there for some of the other opportunities. They're not in any trouble. There's nothing, you know, they're just there to do good things and to connect to the community.
So somebody who isn't in trouble, a youth, can come and
Any
just
young
volunteer. And
Any young person can come in who wants to learn music or be involved in the arts, or if they want to volunteer, if they'd like to be. We have young people who volunteer as peer helpers on some health programs where they go out and talk to other young people about health issues and how to make healthy choices.
Wow.
And you know, it's interesting because I think a lot of people think, oh, those are kind of nice things to do, but you'd be amazed at how many people that we first encounter in the youth development programs, in the course of developing a good relationship with them, it turns out some of them have difficulties, and they come forward with that. And likewise, in terms of the counseling kids that we see, it's certainly a much nicer approach, in addition to saying, you know, tell me about all your problems, and okay, let's figure out what we can do about that, to also have some things that they can do. You like the arts? By the way, while you're working on all these issues, why don't we get you plugged in once a week to come in and do music lessons? You like to draw? We have a drawing class going on. We had theater arts, which was another part of what I really enjoyed. We created a drama troupe in the late 1970s, early 1980s. That was one of the very first teen-operated drama troupes that would go and perform in schools and use teen drama to then initiate discussions about issues that were affecting teens. So
still on? Is that, you still have it?
we don't. We do teen drama. We don't have a drama troupe that goes into the schools, or haven't, at least for a couple years. But that was really thrilling work. And actually, some of the people that were in that first class have gone on to great things. One won a Nobel Peace Prize as part of Al Gore's
About global warming?
About global warming. Another one is a county attorney here in Johnson County.
Wonderful.
So that's always fun to watch.
So looking at the arc of the 40 years, have there been have there been major changes in these young people, or the problems 40 years ago are the same problems today, or what's different?
A lot is similar, but the culture and the technology is certainly different. I mean, the whole social media thing is way different. And just take bullying, for example.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
You know, bullying used to be, kids fight with each other, and there are bullies and people trying to establish pecking orders in schools and stuff. That's all one kind of dynamic when there's no social media. But now that there's all this social media, kids get cyberbullied, and it's a lot easier to bully somebody from, you know,
afar.
From afar. And so there's some things like that that are quite a bit different, but a lot of the causes of it, the notions that why would somebody feel like bullying some other person, a lot of that isn't that different. It's just that, you know, they're exposed to a lot more creative ways to get involved in that. So a lot of the issues aren't that different. I was saying earlier, my experience my whole life is that young kids, students, young people in general, they want to succeed. They want to be connected. If you've got kids that are doing things that are questionable in the community, you'll often find that their motivation for doing questionable things are, I just want to be connected to something. I want to have some identity that is me. And I don't think that's changed at all. And I think the more that we can do, I think an organization like UAY and other youth service organizations, I think we all work really hard to help kids stay connected to the community. And if you do that, when a young person feels connected to the community, they do good things.
Mm-hmm.
They try to discourage bad things from happening in the community.
They have a sense of ownership?
They absolutely have a sense of ownership. And there's tons of research that show that kids who feel more connected are less delinquent, they get in less trouble, they are less likely to be involved in unhealthy behaviors or make unhealthy decisions for themselves, and so it's a good thing.
Have drugs been more proliferate?
Yeah, the
you know
drugs,
what I mean?
There've been all of, marijuana in, and then it's out, and then it's up, and then it's down, and other drugs come around. I would say that the advent of crystal meth in Iowa was a horrible thing that was very dangerous for a period of time because it's just so different than all the other drugs. And its damage is immediate, and in many cases, depending on the quantity and duration, it's permanent, and you can't necessarily undo some of the damage, whereas other drugs, even heroin and other scary drugs, don't do nearly the damage. And that happened so fast in Iowa.
Has it gone down? Do you see
It
a lessening?
It has, but it's still very present. And I think high school students are more aware of how significantly damaging it is. And so, but that's not to say that there aren't still kids who will try and do that.
Your age group in UAY is from where to?
Roughly 12 to 18-year-olds, but the last several years we have several programs in elementary schools that help kids that are in 3rd and 4th grade, 5th grade. We actually, our teen parent program serves infants, so that's good. And a couple other things, we in the 1990s, early 1990s, we started doing a program in West Liberty, and we're one of the first agencies to be doing extensive programming with Latino and Hispanic families. And so during that period, we began to offer our services in both English and Spanish, and that I think that's a good thing to have happened. The other thing that's happened in Iowa City is the demographics in Iowa City are dramatically different than they used to be.
There's a big change there.
There was, and but I think that's all good stuff myself. So
looking at your programs, do you have one or two that you just think have been so successful? Besides the drama, the arts, is that kind of right up there as
being able to create a system where you have both youth development and counseling paired together seamlessly? I think that's been the most critical thing that we could do. And certainly I love the fact that we have a professional art studio, art gallery that any young person can come and use. That's great. But the other program that I think has really been good is the teen parent program. And the credit for that really goes to a lot of other staff that helped create that program. But
tell us about this.
Well, in the early 1990, we got a special grant through the College of Nursing. The grant actually was to the College of Nursing to expand a whole program for teen parents. And it allowed us to bring a nurse practitioner on staff, hire some family support workers who would work one-on-one with teen families, do respite child care, and actually use developmentally appropriate toys to teach parents to play developmentally challenging games with their kids to help their kids grow. But the model was great. It lasted about 4 years in terms of the federal funding, but it put us in a place where we were tracking real specific outcomes related to low birth weights, whether they needed public assistance when they were done with the program. And we were able to show in our program we had almost no low birth weights if they were seeing us prenatally. They had fewer subsequent second pregnancies while they were still teenagers. They felt more connected. They had better jobs. about 70% needed no form of public assistance when they were done in the program. So, and we've tracked that kind of information since then. So that program, again, I'm not. I don't have the sense of ownership of that. I think it's really the staff at UAY have done that. But having that in place has been a really good thing.
And it's very
And our counseling
successful.
program it's always sort of in the background, and I don't do enough justice. We have had one of the best counseling programs. Anybody could come and get counseling. We try and make it just as easy as possible to do that.
And so you get federal funding and you get
State funding,
and
private
private
funding.
funding. Okay, good.
And if I were still on the staff, I would be saying right now, and have you made out your check to United Action for Youth yet? Or will you come to our flowers show in May?
Oh, in May, okay.
And buy flowers.
All right, I will be there in May, next May. Behind every great man, there's a great woman. So tell me how you met your wife, and you have 2 children, and where are they and what they're about.
My wife I met here. She was a farm girl and was in the English program here in Iowa. And we just kind of fell in love and got married really quick. Nobody was getting married at that period in our peer group. Marriage wasn't. And it was interesting because it was right when Iowa had changed its divorce laws and had instituted no-fault divorce.
Oh.
And she and I talked. I said, if we're not in love anymore, that's what's hard. So we might as well be married because they've got this easy, if
Easy
it's easy.
escape.
We just sign a paper saying, well, we don't love each other anymore. So anyway, that's
Well, you have 2 children.
my daughter is a school teacher out in North Liberty, teaches 2nd grade, and has been a school teacher for over 15 years. I'm very proud of her. She's an outstanding teacher.
She's a mama.
She's a mom,
And
so we have a granddaughter
named
Kinley.
Okay.
So daughter Quinby, son-in-law Michael Murphy, and Kinley are here, which is great. And then my son Logan is a television producer for CBS Sports. He produces a show called Lead Off, which is a sports talk show on the CBS Sports cable channel.
In LA.
He works in LA. Yep.
So, well, now that you're retired, what? I'm sure it's a big transition, or is it? What are you looking forward to doing?
I'm looking forward to doing some volunteer work. I hope to do some consulting on youth programs, and I got trained in methods called the technology of participation on how to help groups organize action plans or do focus groups or do, if they're studying a community need, how to be able to do that as a group and come up with a plan as to how they want to proceed. So I'm doing some of that work, and over the last 15, 20 years, I've done a lot of consulting on how to enhance youth development programs at other youth agencies. I enjoy that. I like to play golf.
Oh, you do? Okay.
I love to do childcare.
Mean as a grandpa?
As a grandpa.
As a grandpa,
yeah.
okay.
Don't call.
Yeah,
don't call. Yes,
people are going to
babysitter,
call
but
you. I need a babysitter at 9 o'clock Monday.
I do enjoy that. And,
and you and your wife had a foster child for...
Well, we had a foster son in the 70s. He's now 52. And
My goodness.
He's had some health issues. He's actually also in California. So I've been out to see him a number of times to provide support to him as he is coping with some medical issues. And it's good to stay connected to him. My wife never thought that she had done it as much for him as she should. She kept saying, oh, I wasn't a good foster mom. He called out of the blue 20 years ago and said, I just was calling to congratulate you, Grandma. And my wife said, well, what do you mean? Well, I got married, we just had a little girl, and we wanted you to know we called her Ginnalee. The tears come out.
I can imagine.
I turned to her after we got off the phone, and I said, do you really think that you didn't have any kind of good
connection or influence? I'd say so.
And when we've been out to visit him here in the last few months, it's been fun. He talks lovingly of how much we mean to him, and we talk lovingly of how much I learned a lot from him. I used to talk a good game
but when
about how to deal with teenagers. until you actually are dealing with a teenager. And I learned a lot from him.
Was he a teenager when you
He came to us when he was 14.
Wow, that's a tricky age, too.
1 week after he came to us, we found out we were pregnant with Quimby.
Okay.
It's like, oh,
Hello.
hello.
Well, my very last question, because we're run out of time, is what do you like best about living in our community? What do you find
I like the
special?
mix of people and the friendliness of the people. I like the exposure to, you know, arts and culture. I like that there's so many things that, you know, we're a city of literature, we're a nuclear-free zone. A lot of the things that Iowa City has done, I like. So I enjoy it. It is a little bigger than, you know, my wife and I talk about. I've settled on the fact that it's the big city, and I miss a little bit of the small town. But you know, as you age, you start looking at the resource that the University Hospital provides. It's like, well, do I really want to live up in Lancaster, Iowa, and have to, you know, drive 200 miles?
Drive
to
200
get down
miles to
here?
University Hospital.
But I enjoy the people a lot.
Good.
And certainly this last few months, as I get, you know, approach retirement, I've had so many kind things said about me, and young people come forward and say, "Oh, boy, you really helped me a long, long time ago." And
I think must be the greatest gift.
it is wonderful.
Well, thank you for all your
Thank
work,
you.
Jim, and for being my guest.
Thank you very much.
My guest on One of a Kind is the retired director of United Action for Youth. For 40 years, he successfully guided this organization. Words used to describe Jim are visionary, respected, compassionate, a pioneer in youth development, and a passionate advocate for the young. Jim Swaim is one of a kind.